Yeah, so I also use Achieve, but with a little bit of a different audience, which is great. I love the interdisciplinarity of this group of individuals. So I work in Southern Vermont at Landmark College, which was established in 1985. It's actually one of 2 schools that are accredited in the country that solely serve neurodiverse individuals. And in 22-23, it was ranked best college in the North for both innovation and undergraduate teaching. So to define neurodiversity, we like to refer to it as describing a multitude of naturally occurring variations in the brain that result from the human genome. The students that we typically work with might have dyslexia, ADHD, autism, and also executive function challenges. They don't necessarily require a learning difference diagnosis to attend Landmark. Executive function is defined as the cognitive processes that regulate an individual's ability to sustain self-directed action. So, I'm a chemist. One of the things I like to say about this is some students struggle with they need a high activation energy to get started on processes. You all have students like that. But there are so many factors that determine whether or not a student's turning work in. And this model breaks down those factors. A couple other things that I come across a lot are things like the perfectionist syndrome of getting stuck on something and not being willing to turn it in. There's a lot of judgment involved in turning things in. And I have a lot of students that want it to be perfect before they submit it, and they won't submit it. So they'd rather get a 0 instead of being judged and getting a lower grade. And so I'm going to talk about how Achieve can overcome that. So I've been at Landmark since 2020. These are all the classes that I've taught, and the underlying classes are the classes that I have developed for Achieve. So, one of the benefits is that I use it for all levels of chemistry. So the question is, that I want to address is how does Achieve improve pass rates for students, chemistry students with executive function challenges? One thing I should mention also is that executive function challenges we see them persist throughout a lot of the learning differences. It's something that kind of permeates many different students. So the backstory, fall of 2021, my second year, I had 24 students in the same class, and that was a lot. That's not typical for Landmark. It was kind of a unique situation. And I'm actually the only chemistry professor at Landmark at this time. And so the students lacked outside support. And so one student actually mass emailed the entire campus and said, I would like the chemistry and general science curriculum to be more interactive and more flexible. And she specifically cited Achieve as something that I should look into. And so I did, and here we are. When I was an undergraduate, we used a platform called OWL in my chemistry classes, and I did not like it. I sat in my dorm room and, would answer a question and then it would mark it wrong, and I had no idea why I got it wrong. And sometimes I was right, but, the number of digits that I put in, significant digits, was wrong. And so it was subtle things that, were very discouraging for me as a student. So that was a big concern that I had. No ability to provide partial credit, lack of connections to students. At a college that I work at, engaging with students and interacting with students is really important. And so if I'm doing automatic grading, I was concerned that I would lose that. But the techniques that I used actually overcome that. And, in general, will it work for neurodiverse students? That's a big question. So the benefits that I found, instantaneous feedback. The students really benefit from knowing when they get a question right, because they know not only when they can move on, but also in that moment they're learning and solidifying that they've gotten that right. Help students to identify what they're struggling with. How many times have you had a student who, you sit down next to them and say, okay, what are you struggling with? And they're like, everything. I don't even know where to start. The Achieve helps students to identify that. Grades are recorded automatically, so they don't have to hit submit, which means that if they earn a 35% and, they've gotten 35% right, it's automatically recorded in the grade book, which is a really big game changer for the students that I work with. Because again, I put in a lot of 0s for students who, I see them working on the worksheet in front of me. I talk to them and I know they know the material, but they don't hit submit, but now they don't have to. And it provides students with hints and incorrect feedback. As my students like to say, Achieve never sleeps, but Professor Monroe should be able to. So, if they choose to do it at 1 o'clock in the morning, then they're still able to have some kind of support. And it allows students to go at their own pace. I have students that come in at all different levels. And so the ability to have students that can go quicker, they can really personalize their experience. So I have 3 deadlines for my class. The suggested deadline, which is in line with the course content, the 2-week deadline where I put a 0 in, and the middle and end of semester deadlines. The zeros, the students can still do the assignment, but I think it's important for the students to have some kind of reference to how they're doing in the class. Some of my students, if they won't start doing work until they hit a 60%, and then they're like, oh, I need to pay attention to chemistry this week, and then they'll spend time over the weekend watching videos and doing Achieve, and then they'll bring their grade up. So, and then the middle and end of semester deadlines are, the middle is a cutoff so that they have an accurate reflection by the middle of the semester of how they're doing, so that, if you need to, you can have a realistic conversation with a student about how they're really doing in the class. So, ultimately the big thing that I am concerned about is, does the grade accurately reflect content knowledge? And if they're not turning in work, then the answer is no, because they don't know nothing. It's very rare that a student that's showing up knows absolutely nothing. So one of my students on his end of year feedback gave me this chemical reaction for understanding in my class. And, the thing about it is that with chemical reactions, sometimes the order matters, but in my class, the order doesn't matter. It doesn't matter how you work through the material. And so, you have to do all of the things to get an A, but the order in which you approach it doesn't matter. And e-learning platforms allow for flexibility in that case. All right, so just to give a little bit of context of what my classroom looks like, in the synchronous in-person period, about half of the time I spend lecturing. I use a flipped classroom model, so outside of class, students are assigned interactive videos and complementary reading assignments. I encourage them to have the textbook open and to watch the video at the same time so that they can have the multimodal approach to gaining information. And I actually use a course pack instead of a Macmillan textbook, so it's not directly tied to Achieve. And then during class, all of my Achieve problems have class time to work on. Now, I mentioned that Achieve does give feedback, but the thing is that, when a student gets stuck and the feedback isn't enough, then I walk around the class and I engage with the students and I address their questions as they come in. So that's also something where I can adapt to where the student's at and engage with them in that way. And I also handpick the problems that I assign for Achieve. And so, in chemistry, many students struggle until I think Leslie said this earlier, that many students struggle until they actually do it themselves. When the instructor goes through it and it's all beautiful and organized, then, the student's like, yeah, this totally makes sense. And then they do it themselves and they're like, I don't know what I'm doing. So it's really important to have the students do it themselves. This is cumulative student feedback. The red bar represents my averages for providing useful feedback, opportunities for participation and positive learning environment. As you can see, all 3 red bars far exceed the average for my college as a whole. And so, as I mentioned, I was concerned about losing that level of engagement with students having automatic grading, but according to the students, that's not the case, which is really amazing. Last thing I want to leave you with is kind of a challenge. When I first started at Landmark, a dean who recently retired gave me the advice that when you're trying to make your classroom accessible, you don't need to move the parking lot you don't need to totally revamp your class. If you just move the parking spot, then you can make a lot of progress to improving your class and making it more accessible for students. So the challenge is, what can you do to move the parking spot to improve student outcomes? And really, flexibility is the key for that. And the e-learning platforms allow for that flexible and personalized learning that can really benefit students. And so with that, I'll just leave you with my contact information. Feel free to reach out to me if you have questions about chemistry, neurodiversity, or, just chemical education, all the things. And thank you very much.